Hello and welcome to the Avrum Rosensweig Show.
Welcome to one of the internet's best podcasts, where we dive deep into the lives of the extraordinary and fascinating people who leave an indelible mark on our world. Join us as we explore their captivating stories, remarkable achievements, and unique perspectives that shape history and inspire generations. Get ready to embark on a journey through the lives of inspiring people unlike any other.
Hello, folks, and welcome to the Avrum Rosensweig Show. My name is indeed Avrum Rosensweig, and I'm delighted to be here with you. Thank you so much for joining. As I've said many times at the top of my show, the reason that I do this is because I want to remind humankind through some very difficult times that what we have achieved over thousands of years, perhaps billions, is greatness, absolute greatness. And I have met so many people along my road, and from the point of view of history, and history books and so on, who have done such magnificent things on planet Earth. And I think it is time that we remind ourselves of the greatness and the potential that we have as humankind to make things great, right? To take bad times, difficult times, challenging times, and turn them into peaceful times. I believe with all my heart, while I'm here on this planet, that we have the potential to do so. If we can bring war, if we can bring hatred, then we can reverse that. We can bring love, we can bring respect, and we can bring peace. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you have the wherewithal, the interest, please be in touch with me about subscribing to the show. There are all kinds of options out there for you, and we're able to tailor our show to your needs as a subscriber or an advertiser. You can be in touch with me at avrum.rosensweig@gmail.com. Let's dive into the show here. I am very honored and very delighted to have as my guest today, Mr. Dan Gordon. How are you, Dan?
I'm great, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you so much. Let me tell you a little bit about Dan. He was born in 1947. He's an Israeli-American writer, producer, and director, and he served in the IDF, the Israel Defense Force, for 45 years. Dan's a screenwriter who's penned films including Wyatt Earp, movie I loved, Passenger 57, Murder in the First, and developed the story for Rambo, Last Blood. He's been a producer, screenwriter, and story editor for over 200 hours of television. And here's the kicker, and I think this will be the brunt of our interview today. After October 7th, Dan, who, as I said, is an Israeli who fought in the IDF in the 1973 war, the Yom Kippur War, he decided that it was incredibly important to produce a documentary, a 4-part series about October 7th. And his reasoning behind that, as he presented to his manager, was that, you know what, people are going to flip around this narrative. They're going to change it. They try to do so with the Holocaust. And he didn't want that to happen. So he set about creating this very powerful documentary, again, of which we will speak of. Dan Gordon, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
I want to also take this moment, we talked about it before the show when you were in the green room, that I would very much like to dedicate this show to your son, God bless his soul, Zaki, who died in 1998 at 22 years old. Very special guy. What was he like, your son?
He was everything a father could ask for in a son. He was loving and kind, absolutely brilliant, better writer than I'll ever be, brilliant director, such a loving heart to his friends, to his family, to his brothers, to his parents. I think I mentioned to you he was really extraordinary. I mean, he was a published author in hardback at 19. He directed his first feature-length film at 20. When he did his first 2 years at Columbia, because he wanted to do their classics program. But at Columbia, they didn't and they don't let you touch a camera until you're in your MFA. And maybe he knew that he wasn't going to be around that long. And he said, I'm not waiting till I'm in a master's program. I need to make films now. So he transferred from Columbia, which is not a slouch school, into NYU Tisch School of the Arts, which some people regard as the best film school in the world and the toughest one. Certainly at that time, I think it was. And what I didn't tell you on his graduation day, I flew into New York for his graduation, and I'm sitting there with his brothers, and NYU's graduation at that time, I don't know if they still do it, was held in Washington Square, and there are thousands of kids there. There's no way you can find your kid, and so we were texting each other supposedly to set up a place where we meet after the graduation. And I'm texting him, and I'm not getting any replies. And I asked his brothers, "Have you guys heard from him?" "No, we haven't." And I thought, well, gosh, what's going on? So I looked in the program for the people who they have the list of the graduates, and I see Gonzalez and Greenberg and Garcon and what have you, but I don't see Zaki Gordon. And I thought, well, damn, something's wrong. And then I thought, well, maybe he graduated cum laude, which I did. Maybe my son reached my magnificent achievement. And I looked down the list of cum laude, and Zaki Gordon. And I'm going, I had once asked him, I said, "How are the grades doing?" And he said, "Well, what can I tell you?" I said, "You can tell me how the grades are." He said, "I don't really look at grades as an indication of what I've achieved in class." I said, "Really? What do you look at your grades as being?" He said, "I look at grades as being a reflection of my professor's ability to judge talent. And sometimes they disappoint me." I said, "In other words, you're not going to tell me what the grades are?" He said, "No, not." So I thought, his name's not on the list of graduates. I looked at cum laude. Now I'm looking at magna cum laude. Well, I'm shooting way too high. He's not there. And I thought, he flunked out of school. Yeah. And I've been paying for this apartment in Greenwich Village, which was a Kenahora apartment. It was across the street from, the village gate. It was in a damn good location. I thought he flunked out.
Yeah.
He hasn't told me he's been living in the village this whole time, a bohemian bum on my dime. And I'm texting him like crazy, calling nothing. And I'm said to his brothers, I said, your brother's in trouble. Tell him to hide because he's in trouble. And I'm sitting there, and then I thought, couldn't possibly be, but I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. And I'll look at those who graduated summa cum laude. He graduated first in his class.
Did he?
And he slept through his graduation, by the way. He had been out partying the night before, and he slept through the graduation. He showed up late. And I said, "Why didn't you tell me what you'd achieved?" And he said, "Abba, it was too easy. It was never hard. It just wasn't anything that he felt was special." And that was so typical of Zaki. He was an absolute genius, beautiful writer. We wrote one book together. And it was a story that he had actually come up with when he was 5 years old. Mm-hmm. And I was in Israel at the time. I was researching a picture of him. And in those days, a phone call from Israel cost like easily a couple grand, $5,000. It wasn't like WhatsApp. So I got on the phone. I said, "How you doing? Wife, kids?" And he said, "Abba, I made up a movie." I said, "Great. When I get home, you better tell me about it." And he said, "No, I have to tell you now." I said, "Actually, you don't." I said, "Wait till I get home." He said, "No, I have to tell you now." I said, "Okay, if you explain to me why you have to tell me now, you can." He said, "I'm 5 years old. I don't know how to read. By the time you get home, I will have forgotten it." And he used that tense. And I said, "Well, then you better tell me now." That's a very legitimate reason. And for the next 45 minutes, this was a chunk of change phone call, he proceeded to tell me the most beautiful children's story I'd ever heard. And he had it down scene by scene, most of the dialogue. And I said, this is gorgeous. When I get home, we'll call my agent, Jerry Zeitman of blessed memory. I said, we'll call Jerry and we'll set up a meeting with Spielberg's company, with Amblin. And he didn't know who that was. I get home, we set a meeting at Amblin. I go there and I pitch it. I forget who I pitched it to. It may have been Kathleen Kennedy, but I don't remember. Who later became a very, very big producer and head of his company and several others. Anyway, I come home and I said, Zaki, Steven Spielberg, the guy who did E.T. and Jaws and Close Encounters, wants to do your movie.
Yeah, no kidding.
And he said, cool. I said, yeah, very cool. I said, now, here are the notes. He said, what are notes? I said, notes are the changes that they want to make. He said, but if they change it, it's not my story anymore. I said, Steve, well, I'm going to tell you a bitter truth that you're too young to have to learn, but you need to learn it now anyway, because you stepped into the deep water here. If we make the changes, they'll pay me a lot of money, I'll write the screenplay, and they might make the movie. If we don't make the changes, they will not pay me a lot of money, they will not hire me, I will not write the screenplay, and they will not make the movie. I said, that's just the truth. He said, but if they make changes, it won't be my story anymore. And I said, I'm going to lay it on you again. No changes, no money, no contract, no movie. He said, what would you, and this is verbatim, the conversation. He said, what would you advise me to do?
Yeah.
And I said, well, you're 5 years old. It's the beginning of your career. There's going to be a lot of movies to come. Everybody eats it on their first one. I would advise you, as your friend, as your father, and as your partner now, to make the changes that I see. Fine. You do that on one of your projects, not mine.
No kidding. At 5 years old.
I called Jerry and I said, call Amblin, thank them very much, but tell them we have no deal. He said, what are you talking about? I negotiated. He's counting his commission. I said, Jerry, there's nothing I can do. My partner won't make the changes. He said, what partner? I said, Zaki. He said, he's 5 years old. I said, I know, but he owns the rights. There's nothing I can do. It's his story, man. And we blew the deal. So I said to Zaki, when you get older, we will write this together as a book, and we will not make any changes. Cut to, he's 16 years old, and I'm telling this story to somebody. And he pulls me aside discreetly, and he says, but let me ask you a question. Did this actually happen? Because sometimes you embellish stories, which I do.
Yeah, we all do, don't we?
He said, well, especially writers do, what we get paid to do. He said, did this actually happen? I said, it did. He said, we had a deal at Amblin. I said, we did. He said, and you blew it because of a 5-year-old out of your mind.
That's fantastic.
When he was 19, actually when he was 18, he went off to Columbia. I said, I think it's probably time for us to write the piece as a book. And I said, the way I recommend that we do it, and you tell me if it works for you, each one of us writes a draft. We agree, first we do an outline, we agree on the outline. I'll write a draft, I'll send it to you, you rewrite me, I'll then rewrite you, I'll send it to you, you rewrite it me, and then we'll keep doing that until both of us are satisfied that this is the book that we want to have represent us. And so we did. And honestly, our voices as writers were so uncannily the same that today reading it, I couldn't tell you what he wrote or what I wrote, except for I know the places where it's really, really funny. That's Zaki. He wrote funnier stuff than I do. And it was published, it's called Davin. So out of print now, did very well. You can get it on Amazon, and it's published by Delacorte. And it is the most beautiful young people's book I've ever run across. Over the years, I've gotten thousands of fan letters. It was used in hospices to read to patients, not just children, adults. There was one school where the third grade class in Massachusetts, every year for 20 years until the teacher retired, read Davin as their first book that they would read.
Yes.
I remember I got a letter from one woman whose son was going to be 21, and they had lost their copy of the book, and it was his favorite book, and she wanted to give a signed copy of the book to her son for his 21st birthday. And did I have a copy that I would be, willing to sign to give them? And I did, and I sent it. But that's how much it meant to people. And it did that because it was so pure. When it came out of a 5-year-old's purest soul. And beautiful book. And Zaki's legacy is insane how big it is. He also came up with the idea for a film school and had it mapped out entirely. Courses, curriculum, equipment, everything. And it was a revolutionary way of teaching film. At that time, the way they taught film in most film schools was beginning editing, beginning directing, beginning camera, beginning this. And then you would take an aesthetics, history of cinema. And by the time you got around to making a movie, you'd forget what you learned in the aesthetics class. And you made the film 3 years later after beginning camera. And you said, it should be, you just start making movies, period. That's what it should be. And the instructor should screen a classic movie on a Monday, break down the movie as to why it works, pick one scene and say, here's why this scene works. Here are the tricks that the writer and director use. Now you must take those same tricks, make a scene of your own choosing, but on a different subject. And each week, you split the class into cohorts. Each week they're making a movie from day one that they get in. And they're going to learn camera as they go along. They're going to learn editing. That school is now in its it's going to be 25 years next year. Next September will be 25 years since the first school incarnation of it was the Zaki Gordon Institute for Independent Filmmaking in Sedona, Arizona, and that lasted in Sedona till 2012. And in 2010, what was in Sedona was a 2-year program, part of a community college. And in 2010, the president of the college retired, and I thought the new president was a total asshole, and didn't understand what we were doing. And I knew the minute they had budget cuts, we'd be on the block. And so I was looking for a 4-year university to do it as a degree program, not a certificate program. And I knew it had to be at a private school because public universities with teachers unions always screwed it up because they didn't want to do this. They wanted to have beginning directing, beginning editing, beginning this, beginning that fit their credit system. This required a revolutionary approach. And I tried it at a number of state schools, and the teachers union always screwed it up. So I thought it has to be a private school, which means it's going to be a religious school more than likely. Brandeis was anti-Israeli at the time, so I didn't want to do anything with Brandeis. BYU had its own film school. Notre Dame had its own film school. So I asked a Christian filmmaker, a friend of mine, I said, do you know a Christian university with deep pockets that doesn't have a film school that might be interested? He said, maybe Liberty University in Lynchburg, Virginia. And so that school has now been in existence. This will 2025, in September of 2025, it'll be 15 years that we're in existence at Liberty University. It's a fully accredited BA program. This year we added a master's degree in MFA in writing. We have, I think, 300 full-time students who major in filmmaking and something like 800 students who take classes. All this is my son's legacy from a life of 22 years in length. There are children who've been born because people met at those film schools I will never have a legacy as great as my son. Never. I don't know anybody that I can think of who will. And that legacy keeps going every year.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what would you say Zaki's legacy is? And it's all of that.
It's what he's written. It's his philosophy of filmmaking. It is. I gave and still give scholarships at various film schools that encourage young filmmakers. There's a whole generation of young filmmakers who won the Zaki Golden Award for Excellence in Screenwriting and viewed that there's an Academy Award winner who lists it on his resume.
Wow.
And there's a whole generation of 25 years of filmmakers who hitched a ride on Zaki's love, his compassion, his spirit, his soul, his adventurous attitude towards filmmaking, his aesthetics. And the reason it's called the Zaki Golden Award for Excellence in Screenwriting is he never settled for anything less than his own work.
Yes.
It was never, oh, it's okay, it's good enough. It's like, no. This has to be the best I can possibly do at this given point in time. And his best was pretty darn good.
Tell me something, Dan. You entered the Israel Defense Force in 1970. You were fighting in 1973 in the Yom Kippur War. Ultimately, you were a reservist for another many decades, 45 years in total. And then a number of years later, you set about doing a documentary on October 7th. With all of that, with all the experiences you've had in life through the filter, through the guise of being a Jew, of being a Jewish warrior, of losing your son when he was 22 years old, what is life to you today? Do you embrace every second of it? Do you see it as fleeting? What's your overall approach to your life?
I'll just correct you on one thing. I went into the Israeli army in 73. I was actually in boot camp during the war, and then the Israeli military made a mistake with a number of people in boot camps and decided to, the situation was so desperate that they had to be brought up to the front line. The greatest privilege of my life outside of being my son's father, and I say that all three of my sons, was serving in the Israeli army. Absolutely. In that war, and I did absolutely nothing heroic whatsoever. I was lucky enough to know and serve in a company of heroes, but honestly, I was, the good soldier strike, But I did know a morning where I was absolutely 100% sure that I would not live more than a half hour after sunrise. No question. That no one in our unit would be alive half hour, 40 minutes max after sunrise. And that was a seminal moment in my life. I was 26 years old. Went into the army after university, after I worked a bit. And there was an incredible calm in knowing that all you had to do was do what the regimental sergeant major said you had to do the following morning until you could no longer do it. All other problems dissolved because you were going to live that stuff. It was very, very, very calm, contrary to what I might have imagined. From that point on, honestly, I have been blessed to never take anything for granted, to live each moment. I forget who, there was somebody who once drew a comparison between Tevye and Zorba the Greek. And they said one lives his life as though he'll live forever, and the other lives his life as though it's the last day he'll ever live.
Yes.
I think I do that. And I think basically they're both the same thing. And that is just to embrace and suck up every bit of joy and meaningful work that you can in every second, and not to take any moment for granted, because it can be gone that quick. The entire life can change in that instant, having unfortunately experienced it. And in Zaki's death, I had this happened just like maybe a week ago, because this is the time of year. This is my son's yahrzeit. He killed in the accident first day of Hanukkah. And I had this, I was asleep, but there was this like mantra on a loop running in my head while I was dreaming. And I actually haven't told even my wife about this. And it was just one sentence: in death, Zaki gave me life. And I just kept hearing that over and over again. In death, Zaki gave me life. In death, Zaki. And that's very true. If I had forgotten for a moment how fleeting it was, and I can tell you that I went through all the stuff that people go through, barely functioning for several years after that, and drinking an awful lot, way too much, and being suicidal. And honestly, if I didn't have other children, I would have killed myself. There's no question about it.
Yes.
And I thought, I can't do that to my other sons. But I know that I embraced life more because of what Zaki taught me. And my youngest son once said to me in his own profound wisdom, Zaki came to this earth to soften you. And I think that's very true. That's very true. I think the person I was, both after his life and promotion into the next life, was an immensely better person than I was prior to that. Maybe counterintuitive, I don't know. But I feel Zaki's presence constantly. I think he was my writing partner as well as my son. I told you that earlier, and I feel his presence. I feel him there, kicking me in the ass when I need it, and pulling me back when I need that, because I need both in my life, and opening doors constantly. And I feel really, I don't know that that's just something that is a defense mechanism that one makes, or if it's real. It really doesn't bother me one way or the other. It feels real, and I'll take it. But and my wife will tell you that she feels Zaki's presence constantly, and doors get open because he's orchestrating things.
It's funny that you said that Zaki's death made you a softer person. So your son said. When I was reading up about you, when I was doing my research on Dan Gordon, one of the most interesting things that was on, I think, a Wikipedia page was that while you were at UCLA, you pitched a one-act play called Once I Was, the Universal Studios. They invite you in to be the head writer for it. You're a kid at the time. You're young. But you were fired by the studio chair, Lou Wasserman, for stealing office supplies. Yeah. And I'm thinking, oh, shit, man. This doesn't fit. Like, I don't see that in the rest of your work in your life. I just don't see it. So what do you mean that you were stealing office supplies? What does that mean? Like what, paper clips or what?
I honestly didn't think of it as stealing. I was 20 years old, and I was the youngest screenwriter, I think, in the history of the Writers Guild, ever under contract as a feature writer to a major studio. And there was a thing at that time, this is 1967, it was called the New Talent Program. They had seen with the success of The Graduate and Easy Rider that there was a real audience for what they called youth films. So they hired, the idea was to hire 3 teams of producer, writer, directors. They actually only hired 1 team. It was the team I was on. The director was a great influence in my life, a wonderful man named Corey Allen, real name Alan Cohen. He was a great great actor. He was in Rebel Without a Cause, and he was a wonderful acting coach. And I had studied acting with him when I was 17. And he was at UCLA, and I said, "What are you doing on campus?" And he said, I just got hired to direct a picture at Universal, and I'm looking for a youth film." And I said, "Corey, this is the luckiest day of your life. I happen to have the greatest youth film ever written," which is total bullshit. It did not.
Yeah.
I had a one-act play that I had written, and I didn't know anything about pitching, but it was a one-character play, so I knew the whole thing was basically a half-hour monologue. So I didn't realize I was pitching in the movie. I just performed the half-hour play.
Yes.
And he said, "This is great. Let's go to Universal." We go to Universal over the hill from UCLA into the valley. Pitched it to a guy named Ned Tannen, who was at that time vice president in charge of production at Universal. He said, "How old are you?" I said, 20. He said, "Call your mother. You're too young to sign a contract." I called my mother. She came down and signed a contract. It never occurred to me that I should get an agent or a lawyer. And I got Guild Scale, which I believe at that time was the princely sum of $1,876.27 or 28 cents. That was for a step deal treatment. But they gave us, to Corey and Gary Stromberg, who was the producer, and myself, we had offices at Universal.
Nice.
Sorta. It wasn't on the lot itself. We were across the street. Universal had bought a motel because it needed extra office space. We called it the Schlepper Colony.
Appropriately.
We were across the street. We weren't really on the lot. We were across the street in an old hotel that I think probably at one time had rented by the hour. So I'm there in the Schlepper Colony, but I do have an office, and it was stacked with all these office supplies. Now, I've still got 2 years of college left. And $1,800 was a canahora sum of money, but still. So I called up all my friends and I said, "Look, if you guys need, yellow legal pads, whiteout carbon paper, those are the things people don't know about these days. Typing paper, I got it, man. I can hook you guys up with all that." And so I literally, because it was my office, so it was my stuff. They put it there for me. It wasn't for anybody else. I didn't share an office with anybody. It's mine.
Yes.
And I was so naive that there was a guard there who was sort of a legendary guard. His name was Scotty. Anybody who worked at Universal for those 20, 30 years knew Scotty. And I said, "Scotty, look at all this neat stuff they give you when you're under contract. Here, help me load it into my car." Well, Scotty ratted me out. And
did he?
Yeah. And so the next day, which was a Friday, my phone rings in my office, and a female voice says, "Please hold for Mr. Wasserman." Now, I knew that Lou Wasserman didn't know I was alive. I was the lowest form of human life, of a screenwriter on the lot. He wasn't aware of me. So I knew it had to be one of my friends playing a joke on me.
Yes.
Which they did. I had a lot of friends who were, "Oh, you're a big shot writer now," and they played a lot of jokes.
You're a big macher.
Yeah. So I said, "Put them on." And so somebody comes on, he starts talking, "Rah, rah, rah, office supplies, rah, 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 rah." And I thought, oh, this is one of the guys that I called up who's playing a joke on me. Like I'm busted for stealing the office supplies. So I don't know if you can bleep this out if the language isn't right. So I said, "You know what? Hey, Lou, fuck you." And I hung up.
Yeah.
Now, no one ever said that to you
Oy.
his entire life. Lou was, let's just say there's a rumor Lou was mobbed up. Okay?
Yes.
And Universal was mobbed up. There was a lawyer named Sidney Korshak, and they were all connected to all the Jewish mob out of the Midwest, out of Cleveland, Mo Dalitz, all these guys. So no one talked to Lou's mother called him Mr. Wasserman. Everybody called him Mr. Wasserman. I mean, he was a tough guy. And so the phone rings again, no female voice. The receiver wraps itself around my neck and starts choking me. Office supplies, fuck me. And it dawned on me, I'm talking to Lou Wasserman.
Yeah.
And I said, "Oh God, Mr. Wasserman, I'm so sorry. I thought someone was playing a joke on me. I would never say that to you. I have so much respect for you. I love your work, sir, and I'm just apologize so much." I said, "But honestly, if all you've got to do up on the 15th floor, the Wasserman Tower at 15th floor, the top floor was just Lou's office. I said, if all you got to do on the 15th floor is worry about how many office supplies I took, life has to be pretty good. So I know you're busy, and I know I'm busy writing a screenplay for you, and I'm going to do a great job on it. It's been wonderful speaking to you, and I just apologize. I'll pay you back for the office supplies, and have a wonderful day, sir." And I hung up.
Yeah,
Nothing happens. And I go, handle that, you know. So now Monday comes around. My name's off the door. All my stuff is in a box piled up in front of the door. The locks have been changed. And my lot pass has been taken away, and I have to pay to get off the lot. It was the first year of the tour, of the Universal Tour. It's 1967, and we of the Schlepper colony parked in the tour lot, and
right.
ticket and then have to pay. So my lot pass was revoked, and I had to pay to get off the lot. Dissolved to 20 plus years later, I've got a picture in Turnaround from, I guess it was Paramount, called Gotcha, that I'm doing with Anthony Edwards and Linda Fiorentino. Jeff Canoe is directing. Just had a meeting with Frank Price. We just set the thing up at Universal. Frank was in charge of production. Walking out of Frank's office on the 14th floor, elevator doors open up, and out steps Lou Wasserman. Now, I've never met Lou Wasserman. I've had 2 lovely conversations with him on the phone.
Yeah.
And Frank says, "Oh, Mr. Wasserman, this is Dan Gordon. We just got a picture of his in Turnaround. Jeff Canoe, Linda Fiorentino, Anthony Edwards, blah, blah, blah." Very excited. And I see Lou is looking at me, going, "I know that name." And I'm pushing that elevator button.
You want to get the hell out of there.
Oh, yeah. And I'm so close to a clean getaway. And he reaches over, and he had a very bony, he was very strong. He was a tall, lanky guy, but he was very strong. And he got me in that bony old guy grip where they get in between the muscle and the bone.
Yeah, I know that grip, yeah.
Get you like that. And he doesn't look at me, he looks at Frank. And he says, "Just make sure he doesn't steal the office supplies."
So what he said, really. He remembered.
This is the greatest man I've ever met in my life. Really. Universal was Lou Wasserman's shop. He knew everything that was going on there. And,
Clearly.
And he never forgot. Never forgot.
Dan, because I like to talk about people and I like to hear people's stories, I'm just wondering, just to veer off for a moment, you mentioned Scotty, sort of the infamous security guy for 30 years. Can you tell me one thing about him, or has there been stuff written about him, or no?
I would imagine somewhere along the line. The reason they called him Scotty was he's a Scotsman, and he had a very thick Scottish accent.
Yeah.
And he was, everybody looked old to me then because I was 20 years old.
Right.
He must have been mid to late 50s, I guess, something like that at that time. And he was the guard at the main gate. But because my car was in the tour lot, and at that time the tour lot wasn't really well organized by then. You wound up coming out. There was one way you could take it. They would take you back out through the main gate. And I needed help with all this stuff. There was a lot of stuff. So I asked him to, lend a hand. And we were across. The Schlepper colony was exactly across from the main gate. So, but yeah, I think a lot of people have mentioned Scotty. He was, he knew every legend there was about the place. He had been there since Carl Langley had run the studio. So he'd been there in the silent picture days. Which, by the way, weren't all that, long before 1967.
Yes.
When you think about it, it was all in all 40 years old. So maybe he was 60 years old.
I find these people fascinating, Dan. You know what? It's the individuals who never get a profile or rarely ever do. yet without them, the wheels could not move. They're cogs that are very important in our lives.
Yeah. And he knew everything that was going on a lot. And Lou wanted to know everything that was going on.
Yeah.
And, you know, I was there for a very brief, all too brief time. I was only there for maybe 6 weeks until I was canned. But I got to meet wonderful people who you know, put an arm around me and gave me advice. I met a great director named Don Siegel, who did, he was a real meat and potatoes action director. He did, Clint Eastwood credits him with being one of his greatest influences. He did the Dirty Harry movies. And we just met, and there were only 2 people my age on the lot, Spielberg and me. And we were the only 2 kids there. And somebody said, you ought to meet this other kid. And I said, well, what does he do? They said, he's a director. I said, what's he directing? They said, well, he's directing a 15-minute segment on Night Gallery. I said, I'm a feature writer, man. I don't hang out with
Narishkite. You don't waste your time with that Narishkite.
I'm doing a 15-minute segment on Night Gallery, man. I'm doing a movie, you know. But anyway, Don Siegel gave me a great bit of advice when he said, never, because at that time I wanted to direct. He said, never do more than 3 takes if you can avoid it. And on your first day on the set, pick a scene that you know you're going to cut from the movie. It's a burn off. And print the first take. Now everybody be terrified of him. Because they go, this guy doesn't give you a second chance for anything. He said, everybody will be on their toes. And you'll never have a problem. And it was probably the best single piece of advice I ever got, you know, practical advice. And he was right. You know, he was 100% right. You get out there first day. And I later worked with Mike Landon on Highway to Heaven for 3 or 4 years. And Mike was another huge influence in my life and really taught me my craft. And Mike was very much like that. Mike, 3 takes and he was out.
Is he a nice fellow?
Mike was the best. He was like a big brother to me. Honestly, what you saw was what you got with him. He was incredibly kind, very generous with his knowledge, unbelievably funny. He had an encyclopedic knowledge of jokes in between takes, and he directed 90% of the episodes. So he was starring in them. He'd written a lot of them, and he directed 90% of the episodes. And he was a genius, an absolute genius at making television products. In between takes, he would be telling jokes to the crew just to keep the atmosphere on the set light. And I never heard him tell the same joke twice in whatever it was, 4 years that I was with him.
And that's a skill.
I'll tell you one story about Mike that'll tell you who he was. You know, we were doing a show called Highway to Heaven. Now, Mike had already done Little House on the Prairie, where he was America's dad for, I think, 14 years. And before that, he had done Bonanza, where he was Little Joe for about 17 years, maybe 18 years. Highway to Heaven was different because he was playing an angel. And he would get requests from Make-A-Wish Foundation of kids who wanted to talk to him. And I learned very quickly that on the day he was going to have to meet with a Make-A-Wish kid, you didn't want to be around that. If you had a problem, keep it to yourself, because it was the only time Mike was in a bad mood, and he was not a vile mood. And the reason was, Make-A-Wish kids would always want to talk to him alone because they knew they were dying. They were talking to the angel, and they wanted to know what heaven was saying. And he never refused, not once. And it cost him emotionally a lot. And he never, ever turned it down. If there was a Make-A-Wish kid, he was there. He stayed late for him. He brought him on the set. And he knew there was going to come a time that they'd want to talk to him alone. And I never asked him, and he never told me what he told me. But when they would leave, he would pour a water glass full of vodka. And he would not be able to leave his office until he drank it. And he hated me big emotional price for every one of those, and he continued to pay that price. And he was an extremely good guy, such a really beautiful guy.
Yeah, he came across that way on screen, like he was a very soft, ethereal sort of fellow.
Yeah, and his real name was Oogie Horowitz.
Yeah, I know. I love that. I
Yeah,
just love that.
Oogie Horowitz, and his nickname was Oogie.
Now tell me something. You worked with Sly Stallone, right?
I did. Yeah.
What is he like, Sly?
Ask me a different question.
Ask you a different question. Okay.
I don't
Well,
want. I'm not going to badmouth anybody.
all right. Fair enough. Fair enough. So let's dive into the area that clearly interests both of us.
Ask me what it's like to work with Denzel Washington.
What is it like to work with Denzel Washington, Dan?
We did a movie called The Hurricane. Some of Denzel's best work, and he just was the nicest man in the world.
He is a nice fellow. He is
unbelievably nice and very religious. And it's not in a dogmatic. He's both religious dogmatically, but he's also deeply, deeply, deeply spiritual. And his instincts as an actor are probably the best that I've ever run across in anyone. His instincts he has an infallible true north to know what works and doesn't work, and what works for him and doesn't work for him. He's a fun up guy, but also very humble, very modest. I think he knows that he could have taken he grew up pretty hard scrabble.
Yes.
And his life could have been a lot different than it is. And I think he's just full of gratitude and knows that his life could have been a lot different, that he could have ended up in prison or dead. He's just a really nice man, but also an extraordinary artist to watch work. A lot of actors just say the words and wait for the other guy to stop talking so they can say their line. He really listens, what's being said, and he embodies who that character is. And you always get the feeling when Denzel's working that the character just thought of those words. And they actually just came out. I can't say enough good stuff about him.
Do you stay in touch with these people whom you really like?
You know, the nature of the motion picture business is you work with people, you have an experience, you bond, you swear you're going to stay in touch, and 99 times out of 100, our lives take us in different directions, and you just don't. I am still in touch with Kevin Costner, who's also an incredibly nice man. And he was a joy to work with, a real joy to work with. So Kevin and I have maintained contact over the years, but we did Wyatt Earp, but then we did another 2 pictures together that never got made. So we actually continued to work together for actually 3 pictures on 3 different projects. So that brought us together more.
So would you?
Incredibly good guy.
He seems it's interesting. The people that you like, they're all individuals, characters who come across as being very soft and gentle, even on screen.
Yeah.
Kevin Costner does. Dancing with Wolves is a good example. Like, would you invite him to your grandson's bar mitzvah?
Sure.
You would. Okay.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
You think?
No, Kevin's a good guy, and friendship means a lot to Kevin. Kevin's a very, very, very loyal friend to his friends.
Mm-hmm.
He's fun to watch because he continues to get better. He's a better actor today than he was 10 years ago. He's a better actor today than he was 20 years ago. He continues to evolve as an actor and get better and better and better. And there are certain actors, especially men, certain actors who were really good looking when they were young, and part of what made them was that they were so handsome. As they age, they either get better or worse. They either, oh God, I've lost my edge because I'm no longer 20 years old, or they grow into themselves and almost shed the burden of being incredibly good looking.
Oh, that's
and
interesting.
better actors.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
The people aren't just saying, wow, that guy is really hot. You know, it's like, oh, I see the character now. I'm not just looking at the movie stuff. Paul Newman was that way. Paul Newman was an actor who got better and better and never stopped getting better as an actor. If you look at his early work compared to his later work, he's so refined as an actor when he's 80 years old. It's so, it's like the most distilled Irish whiskey in the world. Kevin's like that. Kevin keeps getting better and better. Denzel's like that. Denzel, if you look at Denzel's work, it gets better and better and better and better. And it's just, all these guys were hot-looking guys when they were young. They were the hot young thing, fiery, you know.
Yeah.
And as they've gotten older, I think they shed both the burden of the looks and the crutch of the looks. Because you can get by on charm and on good looks. That'll ease your way through a lot, you know. I mean, look at Clint Eastwood. Clint Eastwood was, God, he just was nothing as an actor when he was, and he was incredibly, as Rowdy Yates, he was unbelievably handsome.
Yes.
Unbelievably handsome. The older Clint got, the better he got as an actor and as a director. You know, the guy, I think he's in maybe 50 movies, something like that.
Yeah.
Probably the most prolific director around. And he's 94 and he's still working.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it?
Right now. He's like Willie Nelson. You know, Willie Nelson, except Clint keeps evolving. Willie Nelson has been Willie Nelson. He's still Willie Nelson. Nobody's better at being Willie Nelson than Willie Nelson.
That's true. Well put. Well put.
Greatest musicians ever, especially as a guitarist. But you see guys like Eastwood and Denzel and Costner. They just keep evolving as actors. And there are certain actors, I won't say who they are, but they're of an age now, but they're still doing the same shit that they did when they were 25.
Yeah, I know.
You know,
It saddens me to watch.
Yeah. And there are other guys, you know, I flirted with working with Tom Cruise on one picture. I have so much respect for this guy.
Yes.
So much respect for this guy. He's 60 or 61 now. Nobody can do what Tom Cruise can do. He's a maniac. He's a total maniac. I mean, he does, if he had no career other than being a stuntman.
Yeah, he does his own stunts. Yes.
You know, Diana. If he had no career other than being a producer.
Diana.
If he had no career other than being a movie star actor, and it's not just an actor, but a movie star actor, Diana. But when you go back and you look at him in Rain Man, and he was 26 years old,
yes,
that's some of the best acting you'll ever see anybody do. And Dustin Hoffman had the flashier part and got the Academy Award for it, but the guy who really was working in that movie was Tom Cruise. Dustin Hoffman had an easy part. He was playing, you know, a guy who was mentally challenged, so he had mannerisms. Tom Cruise created a character, and he led the chorus in that movie. He moved every scene. It wasn't Dustin Hoffman who was moving those scenes. It was Tom Cruise, and he's people forget what a good actor he is, but he's so multifaceted and multi-talented, and you know, he's a workhorse. He's just a workhorse. And you talk to people who work with him, they have nothing but respect for the guy. And that'll tell you right away what the measure of that person is, because a lot of people are jerks. And a lot of people will say, oh, God, that guy. Thank God the movie was over, you know.
But by the way, Dan, what is the ring that you're wearing? It looks like a big Stanley Cup ring. That big ring on your left hand.
This is a national championship in powerlifting.
Really?
Yep. I am I still compete in powerlifting in the 165 ultra cocker class.
Well, what do you lift? What weight?
I can no longer do deadlifts or squats. I do bench press, and I'm now going to be 78, and I can still do 225 on a bench press.
Really? That's fantastic.
Yeah, yeah. That's it. Honestly, saved my life. I mean, I have number of health issues, and the physical therapist who I knew said, "You need to start powerlifting,
Hmm.
not bodybuilding, not Olympic lifting, but powerlifting, because it widens the blood vessels. Because as you tear muscle tissue, the heart pumps blood to that tissue and actually widens blood vessels. So if you have issues that are either coronary issues or kidney issues, if I have both, that's a good thing." And honestly, I got a death sentence about, must be 20 years ago, from the guy who was a top nephrologist at UCLA, who said, "Well, you've got 10 years to live, 5 years from now you'll be on dialysis, 5 years after that you'll be dead, so it's a blessing, you've got 10 years to put your life in order." And I said, "Yeah, great, thank you, goodbye." And I started looking for alternative things to do and found some alternative doctors, and then found a great physical therapist who said, "This is easy. You drink, if anybody has chronic kidney disease, I'll give you the answer. You become kosher. Cut out all red meat, all shellfish, all those things which overload the kidneys. Drink 4 liters of water a day. Take 12,000 units of L-arginine a day, which creates nitric oxide, which oxygenates the blood,
Mhm.
and start powerlifting. You'll be fine." It's
And
20 years later, the doctor is dead, and I'm still here.
the doctor's gone.
Yeah,
Is your wife cool with your powerlifting?
yeah,
She's okay with it?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I said I don't want you coming to any of the meets because at a meet I'm very monk-like and focused. I don't talk to anybody because it's a stupid sport. You train all year for 3 lifts. Each lift is going to, all in all, take about uh, 2 seconds at the most, 2.5 seconds. I mean, imagine training an entire year for a total of 8 seconds. And if you don't do it in those 8 seconds, it's over. That's, that's it. So I'm very conscious. She came to her first meet this year. And I said, "Look, I'm not going to talk to you. I'm just not going to be social at all. I've got to just be in the zone." And she was cool with that. And I said, "Nothing is more boring than a powerlifting meet, even to the people who are in them. It's just to see people going, ah. It's just boring." But she sat through it, and she was a great
Good for her. Good for her.
And she is a great sport, so wasn't surprised.
I want to talk about October the 7th.
Yeah.
But before I do, I'm a little bit ADHD. I'm so curious about who your dad was in all of this. What did he do for a living, your dad?
My dad was a really interesting person, and we had a strained relationship. I can't say it was a loving relationship, but I had and have tremendous respect for him. My dad was orphaned at 11, came from full father. He grew up very, very hard life. He was shuttled back and forth between relatives who didn't want him, and he was apprenticed to all kinds of people. I suspect he endured some awful things along the way. He became a very fervent early Zionist. My dad was born in 1895. Mm-hmm. And so he, at 10 years of age, was fluent in Hebrew, which was not rare for people who grew up, religious. My father comes from 12 generations of Hasidic rabbis. So,
Does he?
Yeah. One who was a very famous rabbi, my great-grandfather, Israel ben Shmuel Dov, was buried in the portion of the righteous, Kalkat Tzadikim, the portion of the righteous on the Mount of Olives, where literally only saints were buried. He was a chief justice of the rabbinical court in Kavalyeke, which is near Poltava, the county of Poltava, and then he went to Jerusalem and became a very famous rabbi in Jerusalem. It's called the Blinde Rebbe, because even though he was blind and there was no such thing as Braille, he had memorized all of the tractates of everything and was able to render legal decisions and quote from what this thing was Talmud and that and the other thing, and he was very famous because of that. He had memorized everything. And he was a chief justice. He was an Av Beit Din. Anyway, so my dad became a fervent Zionist, which is a big point of contention between him and his father, who was a rabbi, because his father said, you can't use Hebrew to tell somebody you want to go to the bathroom. Lashon HaKodesh, it's the holy language, the holy tongue. And my dad, wrote to girlfriends. I found a couple of things, correspondences between him and girlfriends in Hebrew. Imagine the atmosphere. 1905, we've got poets, Bialik, Chernikovsky, who were writing in Hebrew for the first time in millennia. Hebrew is a live language of guys not just writing religious stuff, but secular stuff, love songs, poems of outrage. Shai Agnon is beginning to write novels. Mm-hmm. And he was immersed in that. He wasn't that far from Odessa, which was the center of that sort of Jewish, Yiddish bohemian life. And find a way up. He was going to make Aliyah. He was in World War I. He was in the Russian Revolution. He was in the Civil War. And in Poltava, he told me that Poltava changed hands. He trained it all the time. 1 week it was the Red Russians, 1 week it was the White Russians, 1 week it was Petlura and Ukrainian nationalists. In World War II, the Germans even advanced in that area. He said the one thing they all had in common was that the minute they would get in, they would have a pogrom against the Jews. Yeah. They all had that in common. So he said that the only organized Jewish youth were the Zionists. So he was part of the Zionist youth movement, and they robbed a arms train, and they armed themselves, and they formed up into a militia which defended the Jews of Poltava. And I know that wasn't just a story that my father told, because later, miraculously, as a reservist in the Israeli army, in one armored personnel carrier, which is supposed to have 12 guys, we were short-handed, we only had 8. And I was new in this unit. So it was a new unit that just been formed, so we're all introducing ourselves. There was a guy from Argentina, a guy from Israel, and a guy from the United States outside of myself. We were talking, and all of our fathers came from Poltava. Wow. And I said, well, you guys, your fathers, and I was the baby of that unit. I was the youngest. I said, you guys, your fathers wouldn't know my father, because my father was 52 when I was born. He married very late in life. And one guy said, well, my father very, very late in life. I said, my father married. Anyway, long story short, our fathers all knew each other. Wow. From Poltava. They were in the same Zionist youth group, and they were in the same militia that defended the Jewish community. And one of the fathers, my father was a machine gunner, he was this guy's feeder on the machine gun. Wow. So we arranged a reunion, and our fathers all met. And,
how was that?
They all got together, and they all said, you haven't changed a bit. And it was
right. So they all say, you look so young. Yeah.
So anyway, my dad was going to make, he was told by a friend, it was after the communists took over, that he was going to be arrested and shot the next morning, because he was in this, they were eliminating anybody with military experience who was not a communist. And he was like a platoon sergeant. He wasn't a fine muck-a-muck, but at that time they were even going down to anybody who was like a platoon sergeant. The guy said, you need to leave Poltava tonight, because tomorrow you're dead. You don't take any time to say goodbye to anybody, don't pack, get out of Dodge. And so my dad did, and crossed the Dnieper River and went to Poland. And there he hooked up with a Davin that was going to form a kibbutz, which oddly enough was the kibbutz, unbeknownst to me, that I later went to as a kid when I ran away from him. And he didn't have any papers, didn't have a passport, didn't have any identification of any kind. He got the chief of the local police to write a letter saying, I know this man, he's a good character, and tried to use that as his identity. And he was supposed to meet a ship in Milano that would take him from Italy to Naples, I forget what. Anyways, it's going to take him to Israel. And he walked overland with some other kids, and they got to Italy, and he was arrested and was put in jail. And he was going to be deported back to Russia, which would have been death for him. And thank God he was in Italy where he could bribe a guard. He wasn't in Switzerland where the Italians he could bribe. And he had a brother who he didn't really know because my dad was the youngest of 10, and this brother was the oldest of 10, so he was like 20 years later. The brother had gone to Canada in 1905 and become a big-time cattle rancher in Western Canada. Eventually became the largest cattle rancher in Western Canada. So he said to the guard, "Look, my brother's a rich man. If you let me send a telegram, he'll send me money and I'll give you money. But if you don't, you're not going to get anything. You're not going to make anything by being deported to Russia." So the guard thought that made sense. My dad sent a telegram. The brother sent money. He bribed the guard. He bribed his way out of prison, got a steamship ticket, came to Canada, and he went to work for my uncle as a ranch hand. And he was a ranch hand up in Calgary for about the next 20, 25 years.
Really?
And eventually became foreman of the ranch. And all the cowboys, most of the cowboys, were Jewish immigrants, and they spoke Yiddish.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about that.
You know, I literally, they spoke Yiddish. These were the Yiddish cowboys. And there was a horse trainer who worked on the ranch whose name was Kipling, of all things. And he was a Blackfoot Indian, but nobody spoke English there. The immigrants didn't speak English, and the Blackfoot didn't speak English. So my Uncle Hyman learned Blackfoot.
Did he?
He traded with the reservation. He had a ranch at a place called Pincher Creek, which butted up against the Blackfoot reservation. So he traded with the Blackfoot, which he called the Schwarze Fissela.
Yes.
And so he learned Blackfoot, and this guy Kipling learned Yiddish. So we used to go up every summer. My dad finally came down from Canada to the United States because he couldn't take the winters anymore, and he married my mother in Los Angeles. But we would go up every summer. My dad would work the Calgary Stampede because my uncle supplied all the bucking stock for the Calgary Stampede. So my dad could make more working for the month of the Stampede than he could in LA. So he would close up his shop and he'd go and work the Stampede. It was heaven for my brother and me because we got to see the rodeos from the shoots. And we lived in the bunkhouse in one of the ranches with the cowboys, and it was great. And my Uncle Hyman liked me a lot. My Uncle Hyman was a colorful character, very rough, larger-than-life character. I'm sure murdered people, and he was a great big guy. And he would never mess with my uncle, and the best thing he ever had.
He was a big boy.
Yeah, and my dad was the opposite. I wondered how they were in the same family, because my dad was very, very strong. My dad was like 5'6", and Uncle Hyman was 6 foot and was 240. Anyway, so my uncle liked me. He said, Daniel, Daniel in Yiddish. He said, "You want to go see the Indians?" And I said, "Yeah, Uncle Hyman, that'd be great." I'm like 5 years old, something like that, 1952. He said, "I have very good friends from the Schwarze Fissela." Well, great. So we get on horseback. He had 3 sons, my cousins Sam and Manuel and Morris, and me. And I had I think at that time he gave me a Shetland pony to ride. The others had 4 of us. So we rode out onto the Blackfoot reservation. And I vividly remember this. It was a hallmark memory of my childhood. It was like a scene out of Dances with Wolves. Because this is 1952, and they still had teepees up, and the kids were running around, and the pigtails and the Willie Nelson headband and the whole 9 yards. So we go, and there's this old Indian who steps out. To me, he looked old. He maybe was 50 years old, I guess. He steps out of the teepee, and my uncle shot him a little sign language, wash day, and, you know. And the old Indian looks up at my uncle and he says, "Was machst du heim? Das ist der kleine Freier, schöne Bucher." And
That's excellent.
now dissolved to 1980 something. I'm on the lot at Fox doing a picture. Oh, I was doing Gotcha, the one that I was in turnaround to, not at Paramount, was in turnaround to Universal. And I run into Mel Brooks coming out of the comic book. And I said, "Oh, Mr. Brooks, I have to tell you, I'm such a fan of yours, and I'm starting to rattle off every movie you've ever done." And I said, "I have to tell you this story." And I tell him the story, and he's on the floor going, "This is bullshit." I said, "No, I swear to God it's true." I said, "When I saw Dances with Wolves, I thought it was a documentary." Finally,
I could see why. Yes. Yes.
story of the Old West as I knew it, you know. And then I later, I always wondered. I asked my cousin. I said, "Did I make up this story, or was there really a guy named Kipling who spoke Yiddish?" He said, "No, there really was." And many, many years later, late 80s, early 90s, I was flirting with this guy from British Columbia who had a movie ranch. His name was Danny something. I can't remember his last name. And he had a movie ranch, and I had already done, it had to be late 90s, because I had already done Wyatt Earp. And he said, "Ray, do you have any westerns you want to do? We could partner up. I've got a movie ranch. I can put that up, and I could probably put up half the budget." And we were talking about doing deals. And I said, "I can qualify for Canadian citizenship because my dad was Canadian, and I now have Canadian citizenship. I said, that will qualify for Canadian content, and we can get, more goodies out of the government. Blah, blah. Where was your dad from?" "Calgary, Lethbridge." "Oh, yeah, he was a rancher." "Really? What ranch?" I said, "Well, he was foreman of a ranch called Pincher Creek." And I said, "It was the darndest thing. They had this Yiddish-speaking Blackfoot Indian whose name was Kipling." And he said his grandson works for me.
Yeah.
So I got the story was validated. Well, he said, "Yeah." He said, "That's the real guy." He said his grandson's a hand on my ranch, and his grandfather
That's something.
was a Yiddish speaker.
But your father wasn't good at loving you?
My dad was. We had a very strained relationship. I respected him tremendously. He had the best work ethic of anyone I ever knew. He was the most honest man in terms of business dealings that I ever met. He gave you his word. That was better than any contract he could ever have. He would work himself to death to keep his word. But he had a very violent temper. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't. Here's a guy who's born in 1895 in Tsarist Russia, right? All of a sudden, he's got two American teenagers.
Yes.
What the fuck is he going to do? Everything we said to him was the height of disrespect. And everything he said to us was crazy. Just nuts. And he had a really violent temper. And he was physical with it. And so he and I, engaged in a lot of, rough times. By the time I came along, he was an old man. And he had already had heart attacks. And so by the time I was 14, 15, he couldn't, I could actually, we had one confrontation where he tried to pull me in my back up against his closet door and he was coming at me. And I would never hit my father. But I grabbed both of his arms and I just locked them. And it was the height of humiliation for him. It was a horrible thing for him. He was stronger than he was. He was 66 years old and he had already had 2 or 3 heart attacks, which I promise you my brother and I gave him. Mm-hmm. My brother was hell on wheels even more than me, though I did my share. And it was so humiliating for him that I don't think he ever got past that moment. Mm-hmm. And like I say, in many ways it was a blessing because I knew I had to get out of the house. I absolutely knew it. I knew that we would continue to be. We were once in this one of the final sort of fights we had. My dad is coming at me to whack me around, and my mother is going, "You're killing your father." And I went, "How do I get out of this movie? You're killing your father. I'm the one getting hit, you know.
Yeah.
But I can't. I could have hit him back, but I would never have done that to my dad. I never would have. And so I thought, I got to get out of the house. I can't stay here because I will kill him. Not that I'm going to try to, but he would get so violently angry that I knew he would have another heart attack and die, and it'd be my fault. And so I said, I want to go to Israel. I'm going to Israel. And
You were 16, right? 16 at the time?
I was 15 when I said it. I was 16 when I did it. I got a job at a car wash. I said, you don't have to pay anything. I'll pay everything. I'll do it all myself. I'm getting out of there. I just need you to sign the papers. That's all. And so I basically ran away with their blessing and active encouragement. And that was the great gift that my father gave to me, was me going to Israel at 16 to the kibbutz without my family, without knowing anybody, and jumping into the sea of Hebrew. And really, I became me in Israel. I became me on Kibbutz Israel. Whoever I am today was born in Kibbutz Israel. And I met the greatest influence in my life in terms of writing was my literature teacher, a very blessed memory, in Ginigar didn't have a high school. We went to a communal, I'm thinking it was a regional high school that serviced 3 different Kibbutz communities in class. And Shlomo Kaniel was the literature teacher, world literature, and Hebrew literature. And when I didn't speak Hebrew when I got there, by the time school started, I could sort of get along conversationally, but I certainly couldn't write. To this day, I can read Hebrew fluently, but my writing in Hebrew is, I have to read pause and things like that. Anyway, so he allowed me to do my compositions in English, because he could put it in English. So the first composition I did for him, he said, I want you to do another one for me. You do it on this. And I forget what the song was. And I thought, well, I guess that one wasn't any good. Or something. So I did another one. And he said, okay. And Shlomo was a very interesting man. He was a Holocaust survivor. He had been a genius as a child. Still a genius, I know. He was in Auschwitz when he was 8 years old with his brother. They escaped from Auschwitz. He was an alcoholic. He would come into class always hungover. High school teachers sitting there smoking a cigarette, his head in his hands like this.
Yeah.
And the whole class, kibbutz kids were wild animals. We were horrible. We were vicious.
Yes.
We once drove our history teacher, who was a wonderful man. We drove him out of the classroom throwing food at him. We were Zildachayas. I mean, real,
Wild animals.
Everybody was quiet. Well, Shlomo had his head down like that. No one said a word, and then he would just lift his head up and start speaking almost in a whisper. You could hear a pin drop. And he lectured about whatever thing he was talking about. So he was a very special guy. Anyway, he said, I want to come out to your kibbutz this Shabbat, and you and I are going to take a walk in the woods and have a talk. We had a big forest in the Balfour Forest. And I thought, I'm in really deep shit now. I'm evidently going to be expelled, which would have been very serious for me because I was in Israel alone.
Yes.
And I was on the kibbutz with an agreement that I was going to school, and maybe they wouldn't let me stay on the kibbutz if I was kicked out of school. I had no idea. Right? So I was really, thought I was a freak. And it was a big deal then because there were no buses on Shabbat. And you had to sign out on a car. He lived in Yifat, so he actually had to sign out on a car, and that was an expense for them. You had to sign up ahead of time. There were a few civilian vehicles on each kibbutz. So him coming to speak to me on the Shabbat was like, ooh, this is serious.
It's a big deal.
Yeah, yeah. So we go up, we took a walk up in the forest. He's not saying anything. He said, I think I have very bad news for you.
Hmm.
And I thought, that's it. I'm expelled, and God knows what's going to happen. He said, I think you're a writer. He said, and I don't know what you want to do about it. He said, and if I were you, I would run from it. But if you don't want to run, I can help you. And it sounds pretentious to say at 16, I was waiting my whole life to hear those words, but I was waiting my whole life to hear those words. Mm-hmm. And he said, from now on, you don't come to class. I never want to see you in class again. I'm going to give you a reading list. Go to the library. There was a very tiny library there. Go to the library, you read. You're not ready to write anything. You try and start writing now, you're going to develop bad habits and ruin yourself. All we're going to do is you're going to read, and I'm going to ask you questions, and you're going to talk about literature. That's all we're going to do for the next year. And I don't want you writing anything. And I owe him my entire life. It's
a magnificent story. Yeah. Do you remember what was in the...
I almost married his daughter to become his son-in-law. She was a nice girl, but I wasn't in love with her. I was in love with him.
That would have been great for the story, by the way, had you married her.
Yeah, yeah.
Tell me something. Do you remember any of the books on the list?
Sure, absolutely. The greatest.
Like what?
I never had anything as profound. I was only in university for 4 years. I didn't take an advanced degree, but I went to a good school. I went to UCLA, and I never had to compete with it. The Russians, Dostoevsky. We actually read War and Peace for the first time. De Maupassant, Turgenev for short stories. Mark Twain, Hemingway, Faulkner, Fitzgerald, and then Shai Agnon, he wanted me to read in Hebrew also. It was incredible.
And do you have a favorite writer?
Yeah, sure. Hemingway. I mean, I think the greatest book ever written is War and Peace. I don't think anyone's approached what Tolstoy did in that. It's perfection. He has the macro of the masses of armies and nations, and then he zooms in on Pierre Bezuov and his angst and his daydreams about Natasha, and then he zooms out and you're with Napoleon and Bezuov, and then he zooms in. No one's been able to do it. The complete works of Shakespeare and War and Peace, I think, are on the same level. I think we take the entire canon of Shakespeare, which probably was written by a Jewish woman, I think.
It's a theory.
Yeah.
I will tell you one thing. Rabbi Shlomo Gomorrah is a Talmud Chacham. He's a great scholar. He and I do a series every week called Parsha and Prose. We do it on the Torah portion through the lens of classic literature. So last week we did Parshat Miketz, the portion of the week called Miketz, and we did it through the lens of the Count of Monte Cristo. A few weeks ago, or 2 weeks ago, I think we did the Parsha through the lens of The Old Man and the Sea.
Okay. You asked who my favorite writer.
Hemingway.
Though I think Tolstoy wrote the greatest book and is the greatest writer, my favorite writer is Hemingway, and my favorite book is Farewell to Arms.
Farewell to Arms. We're going to be doing that. And Rabbi Gomorrah argues, see, I'm doing it like the Talmud. Rabbi Gomorrah argues that Agnon was a greater writer than Shakespeare.
Was a greater writer than who?
Than Shakespeare.
Really?
Yes.
Well, I'd love to hear that argument.
I will put the two of you together.
That would be great. I would love to. I would love to hear it. I would love to hear it.
Now, Dan Gordon.
Yeah.
It's October the 7th, 2023, a day that we will always remember. I went and I did a service. I led a service at Congregation Habonim here in Toronto. I didn't think that I would get through it. And I stood before the congregation. It was Shabbat and it was Simchat Torah or Shmini Atzeret here in Canada, in North America. And I said, almost in tears, I said, I really don't know how I'm going to do this, but I need to do it. And I need to be strong for you. And I know as Jewish people, as warriors in history, we will get through this. And a lot of people looked at me and they had no idea what I was talking about, Dan, because it had only happened and the news was slowly coming our way. October the 7th, 2023, you decide that you are going to send what you call your adopted sister, Sarah, a text, despite the fact that she's religious, knowing in your head there's no way she's going to respond because she's keeping the holiday. Sure enough, seconds later, a notification goes off in your phone and she responds. Right then and there, you knew something wrong. Take it from there, Dan. What happened after that?
I sent her just a message. I thought, I should have sent it before Knesset Chag, before the holiday started. I didn't, so I thought, okay, she'll get it after Shabbat. But I sent her Chag Sameach. So she wrote back, very Sameach. They're firing tons of rockets at us. Okay. And she lives in Kibbutz Saad, which is 3,000 meters from the border. It's right in the Gaza area, right across the street from Kfar Aza, that became a terrible killing field. But they get a lot of rockets. So there's another rocket attack. She'll be in the Mamad, she'll be in the safe room, she'll be okay. She said, I've never heard a rocket attack. I said, oh, also, the big rocket attack. She'll still be okay. Then she said, Ephraim hears small arms fire. Ephraim is her husband. I said, if you can hear small arms fire, now we're texting each other on WhatsApp. I said, if you can hear small arms fire, terrorists are in the kibbutz right now. Tell Ephraim to get his weapon, lock the doors, put the shades down, stand them on them. He said, no, we're so close to Nachalos, we hear everything. It's just some kind of gunfight. I said, Sarah, I've been to your kibbutz many times. I've been there during wartime. I know what the sound of gunfire is from Nachalos. I know what the sound of gunfire is. If you can hear it in your apartment, there are terrorists at the gate. Mm-hmm. Tell Ephraim to get his weapon, lock the doors, and don't make a sound. He said Ephraim doesn't have a weapon, and the door lock is open. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to call her because I know that the WhatsApp is her connection to the kibbutz security team. So God forbid I'm talking to her while they were saying to evacuate. So we're continuing to connect. And that was 6:30 in the morning. Israel was afternoon where I live in the United States. Late afternoon. 2:33, something like that. I stay on with her texting until something like 2 or 3 in the morning. And that's when they were evacuated. They were finally evacuated. Late afternoon their time, early evening. 2, 3 in the morning my time. And at the same time, I'm turning on the TV trying to look for news. And the news is very sketchy. Mm-hmm. And they said terrorist attack. Okay, terrorist attack. I know terrorist attack in the terms of 2014, 12 terrorists popped up out of a tunnel exit in a field. And they they got into a kibbutz. It was a horrible thing. It's 12 terrorists, but it's 12 terrorists. Not 3,000. And then as the day goes on, and you begin to realize the magnitude of what's happened, and the magnitude of what could happen, because right away I'm thinking, God forbid if Hezbollah joins in, because then it's lost. If Hezbollah joins in and Iran starts sending over rockets, they can destroy us. That's the truth. And we've obviously been caught in a catastrophic intelligence failure. And I'm old enough to be reliving Yom Kippurim. I know what a catastrophic intelligence failure can cost. And people forget that in Yom Kippurim, we lost 3,000 soldiers in a few weeks.
Yes.
That was 1/10 of our population. Israel had a population of 3 million. To lose 1/10 of your population in 3 weeks, we lost an entire generation of my generation in 3 weeks. And now it's not happening to soldiers, it's happening to civilians. So the first was the magnitude of what this is. And then the second thought that hit me was, because I spent 12 years in the military spokesperson unit, and I know the mindset of both the media and the direction in which Western civilization is going, and the degree to which Hamas and Iran have penetrated academia consciously and by design and very well. I said it won't be 2 weeks before the narrative is completely shifted. And instead of we're the victims of a massacre, it would be we're perpetrating genocide.
Yeah.
And by the way, the massacre that happened was justified. We had it coming. It was an act of heroic resistance. And so I called my manager, and I also called a dear friend of mine, Larry Mortoff, who's my friend, and more than my friend, dear friend. And Larry's on the board of TBN, which is the largest Christian network in the world. It reaches 100 million households. And I knew that CNN's not going to give me a minute of documentary time. Nobody is. It'd be a fool's errand try and pitch this to anybody because I know the business and no one's going to give me 1 minute of their time. TBN will, or CBN. Those are the two places I knew I could go. So I said I'd like to do a pitch meeting with Matt Crouch, who's the head of TBN, and I want to propose a 4-hour documentary series about the events of October 17th. And already, this is now, by the time I get the meeting, it takes about a month so you can get a pitch meeting like that with the head of the network. Now, events were unfolding, and you could see the degree of Jew hatred that there was on the same day. The demonstrations that there were in New York and London, Toronto. And so I said to Matt, I want to do a 4-hour documentary series. It'll be, think of it as the 4 H's. The first hour will be the hope. The second hour will be the heroism. The third hour will be hysteria, hatred, and history, because I want to give what is the real history here. And the fourth hour will be the hope. And he said, write it up, send me a synopsis, and I did, and 24 hours later, it's in the film. I can't say enough good things about Matt Crouch. And I got to Israel it takes a while to set this up, the logistics of what you're going to do. It was going to be a big documentary. It wasn't just going to be run and done documentary. They do things up right there. And just after the first year, just after January, I was in Israel, and we were shooting until the beginning of March, so 10 weeks, I guess. And then post-production, and then the show finally aired in June. Anyway, so the show aired in June, and they not only gave me 4 hours, they wound up giving me 7 hours. I did a 4-part documentary, but I also did a 1-hour special on Rachel Goldberg, which is the longest interview she's ever given, best interview she ever gave. did the story of Noam Tibon, who was a retired general whose son was in Napoleon and called him and said, "Dad, the terrorists are really on our doorstep, and the army isn't here." And he left Tel Aviv, got in 3 firefights on the way down, saved lives, killed terrorists, and then he got to Napoleon in time to save his son and daughter-in-law and grandchildren. It did 1 hour on his story. And then the story of a wonderful man from Toronto named Majid al-Shafi, who was an Egyptian born Muslim who at 18 secretly converted to Christianity, had sort of a network of Christian activists in Cairo, was arrested, tortured, sentenced to death, escaped from Egypt by stealing a set of jet skis in Taba and made it to Eilat. When he got to Eilat, he was put in prison for a year and months because the Israelis didn't know what to do with him. The Egyptians wanted him extradited. They knew if he was extradited, he'd be dead. So they said, well, he broke our laws, he's in prison. He became a cause celeb in Israel, and the Supreme Court finally let him out of prison, and he immigrated to Canada, became a minister, and has a ministry now of human rights activists. And he credits Israel with saving his life. So right after October 7th, he was in Israel, doing a documentary for the exact same reasons that I know the narrative's going to change. So he did a special about it. So it was a total of 7 hours of really quality programming. I mean, I had a great crew, and honestly, I view it as the best and most important work of my life. We put it up for any consideration, and I knew when we did it, there was no way in hell we were going to be.
Why? Why?
Because the TV Academy is infected with an ideology which sees Israel as the oppressor. Sees Israel as the perpetrator of genocide. And this not only didn't fit the narrative, it put the lie to it. Well, we're not going to give that a moment of time. It's a black mark against the Academy, the Television Academy. It's a mark of shame. I honestly don't need the honor of an Emmy nomination. I've had a very fulfilling, rich career. I just had a movie where I won Best Screenplay from the Canadian Writers Guild of Canada on The Renner's Vow. So I've won my awards, been nominated for them, so it's all good for me. But the fact that they didn't recognize that show, that's a shanda for them, not for me.
Dan, what was incredible is that, you know, there are people who may speak out. There are people who might say something in times like this, but you actually took a real step forward and you decided that you were going to resign. You were going to leave the Writers Guild because they stayed silent after October the 7th.
It was worse than they stayed silent. They put out a statement because a lot of writers, including myself, contacted the Guild and said, "No, how is it that the Writers Guild is the only union in Hollywood? The Screen Actors Guild, the Directors Guild, have both put out statements condemning the Hamas attack and standing in solidarity with Israel. And you're the writers. You're supposed to be the conscience. How is it you guys are not doing it?" And the reply was, we were not able to reach a consensus.
Yes.
You weren't able to reach a consensus against infanticide. You weren't able to reach a consensus against burning people alive. That was a moral ambiguity. We couldn't find a consensus to condemn killing 240 some odd young people at a music festival celebrating peace or raping women. There's a moral ambiguity there. You have to couldn't find it. So I said, I know that I'm high enough profile that if I publicly resign, I'll get 15 minutes of the platform. That was the reason I resigned, was to get that 15 minutes of the platform. And so I contacted a publicist and I said, I'm about to resign from the Writers Guild. I've done The Hurricane. I did Rambo. I did Wyatt Earp. I did Murder in the Prison, Passengers in the Prison, blah, blah, blah. I would have it. I'm a big deal writer, and I'm about to publicly resign from the guild that I've been a member of for 57 years. You want that story? Oh, yes, we want that story. So I had a 15-minute platform.
Mm-hmm.
In the New York Times, the LA Times, Variety, blah, 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 whatever it was. I was able to be one voice for 15 minutes, and that was worth it to me. And I also felt such a moral repugnance for the people who couldn't reach a consensus. And I said, I don't want to be fellow travelers with you any longer. I don't. I don't want to. It's bad for me as a writer to associate with you. It infects me with your pusillanimity. It will corrupt my own soul. And so, I have no regrets about that one at all. And like I say, I knew what I was doing. I was doing it to get a 15-minute window to do a platform.
Well, kol hakavod to you. Well done for doing it. And on behalf of our Jewish brothers and sisters, thank you for doing it, because we're all sitting with bated breaths waiting for that voice. And when it comes, as an example from you, it gives us strength. So thank you for that. Very grateful.
It's the exact opposite. It was. I'm grateful that I was put into a position where I could get that platform for 15 minutes.
Yes.
Nothing but gratitude. Nothing but gratitude.
Dan, many of my guests, be they Jewish or not Jewish, be they Bob Ray, the Canada's ambassador to the United Nations, or otherwise actors, authors. Since October the 7th, I've asked many of them, why are the Jewish people hated so much? Why are we hated so much, Dan?
I think if you ever wanted proof that the devil exists, look at Jew hatred. There is no coherent, logical, rational reason for Jew hatred. I honestly think it is Yetzer Hara at work. It is. I don't know that you can be an atheist in the face of Jew hatred, because to me it's proof that there is a force of evil that is palpable and is at work. And if there's a force of evil that's palpable and it's at work, there's a force of good that's palpable and it's at work. So to me, it's almost the proof of God's existence is the existence of Jew hatred, which is satanic. I don't know if I've heard logical explanations that people try to give, but none of them make any sense. In relations where we've been poor, we've been hated for being poor. In relations where we are rich, we've been hated for being rich.
Yes.
Where we've assimilated, we're hated for trying to fit in. Where we've not assimilated, we're hated for being different. So to say, oh, I can find the reason, no, there isn't a reason. It truly is a satanic force at work. It is a palpable, children of darkness at work in a fight between children of light and children of darkness.
As a Jew, are you frightened?
No.
Why not? Why not?
Because I know God's in charge. I read the book. It has a happy ending. We may have to go through some horrific times, but God's in charge, and it has a happy ending. Look, I know that the number of days my son had were written before he was born. I know that. I'm not I think. I know that deep intellectual and spiritual knowledge, not faith. Know it. It was God's plan. It sure as hell wasn't mine, but it was God's plan for whatever reason. And both Diana and Mick. And I'll tell you the reason I know it. Just so you don't think I'm just blowing smoke. told you my dad was born in 1895. My dad passed away when Zaki was maybe 12 years old. Right? Yeah, I think it. Even maybe a little younger. Maybe Zaki was 20 years old, something like that. Yeah, he would have been 20 years old. Now, my dad was also Zaki's godfather at his group. He was the son doctor, which means he's responsible for his soul. And my dad knew he was dying. My brother had died of cancer. My brother was diagnosed with brain tumor when he was 43, and he died at 45. So my dad saw his firstborn die a rather horrible death. And I knew that finished him and he was on his way out. And he knew it. And he said, now I want you to see to several things. And there was no talk about, I love you, I'm proud of you. And I'm not faulting him. My dad was just very practical. And he said, I'm a very practical man. I need you to do certain things. And amongst the things, he said, when I pass, you bring your mother to your house. It's going to be hard for her, and you have to stay with me for at least 2 months, and then you have to make sure my stuff is out of the house. He was very practical about what to do. He was looking out for his wife, looking out for my mom. And he said, you need to put down on the tombstone, born in 1898. I said, Dad, what are you talking about? You were born in 1895. Who are you trying to impress? What's the deal? You're knocking 3 years off your life? What's that about?
Yeah.
And I said it just as I said it now. I was laughing at him. He got furious. He said, what is the pup telling the master what to do? I said you put down 1895 and you put down 1895. That's the way it has to be. Jesus, the old man is nuts. It hasn't changed since I was 15. I said, fine, you put down 1895. 1898 rather. I know at 1898, you know it wasn't 1898, but I'm going to put down 1898. My dad was born. He didn't know exactly what the date was. It could have been 1894. It could have been 1896. He thought it was 1895.
Mm-hmm.
But he knew it was Shabbos Hanukkah.
Mm-hmm.
That's the one thing he knew. Shabbos Hanukkah. So we put on his tombstone, in stone, 1898. Shabbos Hanukkah, 1898. Okay. Zaki was taken Shabbos Hanukkah,
Yes.
1998. 100 years from the day. That was my dad letting me know this has been written, you can't change it, and it's okay. So when that date rolls around, you understand this is the last gift I gave you. I'm telling you, it was written, it was done. I made you carve it in stone, not write it down. Somewhere around 2007, 8, something like that. I'm in Israel. I meet the woman who was the commander of our unit, the military spokesperson unit, Edie Sloan, who was a full colonel, best commander you can imagine. Wonderful woman. Great leader. She was studying Kabbalah. And she said, I want you to come and meet my teacher. And I said, Ruth, I'm not going to. Why? She said, I don't know why, but I think it's important. She didn't know anything about my son's accident other than it happened. She didn't know any details. So I go and I meet her teacher who she's studying Kabbalah with. And the teacher says to me, I want you to know that your father was with your son when he was taken. Now, the teacher didn't know anything about the accident, nothing. He was there to pull his soul out when he was taken, so he felt no pain. This teacher knows nothing about the accident, or nothing, zero. And they read it going, I don't even know what the hell she's talking about. I said, yeah, I do know that. I know that my dad was with Zaki. And now that you've said he was there to pull his soul out, so he didn't feel any pain, makes perfect sense because I know about the details of the accident. And he would have felt a lot of pain, except he was told that. And he was the son doc. He was his godfather. That was his job. And he did it. Because my dad gave me his word. Doesn't matter if he was dead or alive, he was going to keep it. And I remember when my mother, when I was telling the folks at the cemetery about the tombstone, I said, you got to put down his date as 1898. And I'm like, what are you talking about? 1895. I said, Mom, if I don't put down 1898, I swear to God, the old man's going to jump out of the grave and strangle me. You know your husband, I know my father, will come back from the dead and tell me. And she laughed, and we both thought it wasn't that funny. It was his message that this was written in stone. And that should be, if not a comfort, at least a reminder that it's a righteous judge. Righteous judge that all, in the Psalms, King David says, "You knew me when I was in my mother's womb."
Are you a happy man, Dan?
Yeah, absolutely.
Satisfied with life?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, regrets are a total waste of time. They don't get to anything. There's nothing to regret because there's a wonderful movie that Steven Spielberg did that I thought was really an underrated piece. It was a very good piece of work. It's called Bridge of Spies. And there's a spy in there who is so stoic. And the Tom Hanks character says to him, you're not even reacting in any way that you can be put in prison for the rest of your life. And the guy's reply is always the same. He says, no, it's not. If I react, no, it doesn't. So it's the same thing with regrets. Would it help? It wouldn't. So they're a waste of time. Have I known sadness in life? Sure. Have I known tragedy in life? Absolutely. It's part of the deal. Nobody gets that. My foster father, come on, who became like a father to me, said everybody's got a little peck of life. There's nobody who doesn't. Some are heavier than others, but everybody's got that. Part of the deal. It's part of the deal. And for whatever reason, maybe it's a summing up, I don't know. Just if I look selfishly right now, I'm in the most productive period of my entire life. In terms of both quantity and quality. I would say in the last year and a half, the work I've done in the last year and a half is the best of my life. And it's been prodigious. I did a 6-part miniseries based on a novel that's about to become public domain. And so right after January 1st, I hope to be able to place it. It's a whole miniseries based on a classic novel. I did the 7 hours of programming for CBN, and I've written 3 screenplays in the last year that are amongst the best work of my life. And they're being made. It's not just that I wrote them and they're on a shelf. They're actually, and I'm working with people now who are amongst the best people I've ever worked with in my life.
It's beautiful.
The relationship between producer, director, and writer is almost idyllic. I kind of have to think myself. So yeah, I'm about as blessed as you can possibly be. I've got a wonderful family. All good.
So over the last few months, I've been playing around with artificial intelligence a little bit for my show. And one thing I've asked our AI to do is to write a poem about my guests. So I have an ode to Dan Gordon here that I'd like to read to you. Ready for this?
Sure. Now, before you get into it, I'm going to tell you, the studios are starting to use AI to write coverage on script. So it used to be you'd hand in a script to an executive who'd give it to his assistant. The assistant would give it to his girlfriend. The girlfriend would give it to her or his boyfriend.
Yeah.
And they would be the actual person to read the thing. And that's who would decide if you got the gig or not, because that's who would have written the coverage. Now it's all going to AI. And they've programmed the AI to sound like stupid studio executives. I mean, some of the comments are so inanely stupid, but they got the dialogue right. Well, the guys who used to do this stuff. So anyway,
the world we live in is mesmerizing. So here's the poem called Ode to Dan Gordon. Dan Gordon, with the pen in hand, crafts worlds where heroes make their stand. From Wyatt Earp's dusty plains to passenger 57's high flying gains. A master of the written word where action speaks and tales are stirred. The hurricane, broad voices true, a fighter's heart, a spirit anew. Through blood and sweat, through pain and strife, he painted courage and breathed new life. In Murder in the First, a tale of wrong, he captured justice, fierce and strong. Not just in film, but TV too, where stories of life in Highway to Heaven grew. Highlanders, wars in time did soar, and soldiers of fortune asked for more. 200 hours he shaped the frame, a screenwriter's art, an endless flame. He turned terms of endearment so profound, and Rain Man echoed a soft, sweet sound. From stage to page his stories flow, as life and fiction both bestow. But beyond the screen, beyond the ink, a soldier's tale made him think. In Gaza's fight, his own heart bled. The stories of war, the stories of war, the words he said. Dan Gordon's voice is deep and wide, a screenwriter, a soldier, with much to hide, but he shapes the world where hearts collide. With each script, each word, he takes us inside. What do you think of that?
Good God.
I know, good God is right. Isn't that something?
That's extraordinary. Jeez. Yeah.
I get many different reactions to AI. Like, as an example, I mentioned before, I read it to the ambassador to the United Nations, Bob Ray, and he said, well, it's kind of fluffy. It's nothing too great. But there are other people I read it to who thought, wow, this is marvelous, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I sound like a hell of a guy to me. So.
You do sound, you can pat yourself on the back for sure.
Well, I did pat the AI on the back. I don't know how true it is. It's fun to hear. Gosh, that's amazing.
Dan Gordon, I want to thank you so much for being my guest. I appreciate you opening up and giving us a sense of who you are, a real sense of who you are. So like they say in the vernacular in Yiddish, Yisha koach to you. Really nicely done.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been a really delightful hour that we spent together, and I enjoyed it tremendously. The questions were one that helped me clarify thoughts to myself. So,
yeah, they say I do sort of therapeutic podcasting, but I think the thing that honestly that I'm happiest about, it's meeting you. You seem like a marvelous human being, protecting the Jewish people and doing so valiantly and so courageously. But I'm also really happy that we were able to talk about your son.
Yeah,
because of course, while I didn't know him, he just seemed like such a special person. He was here for a short time, and God bless his soul.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Amen and amen and amen. And, you know, like I say, Zaki is with me constantly and helps me. When I interviewed Rachel Goldberg, I never told her anything about Zaki. But because of Zaki, I was able to establish a bond with her. I mean, she's one of the most eloquent women I've ever met, or eloquent people I've ever met. But honestly, she gave the best interview she's ever given. And I afterwards pulled myself together and thanked my writing partner, who came through for me once again. Thanks to him.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching and for listening. And I remind you, please, that the motivation behind this podcast, why I do it, is to remind everybody that there are incredible people in this world who work, sometimes together, sometimes separately as individuals, to make our world even better. And despite the fact that there is a cloud hanging over us nowadays, especially if you're Jewish, that we have to realize that there is brilliance and there's creativity amongst us. And it's really, really important to listen to their stories, as we did the Dan Gordon story today, and take out of that the bits that make sense to you. If you're trying to find your zone in life, if you're trying to find a place where you just feel so at home with your own creativity, your own ability to make things in this world of ours, then think about what Dan has done in his life. Like, the idea that these last couple of years have been the greatest years of his life, to me, that's unbelievable. So I do have older people who are in their late 70s, early 80s. Listen to that message, because it's a really, really important one. These can be the greatest days of your life. So we will be back soon with the Avrum Rosensweig Show. And also watch Parsha and Prose with Rabbi Shlomo Gamora. It's very, very interesting, and I think you'll enjoy it. But until then, as we say in Yiddish, sei gesund. How do we translate that, Dan? Sei gesund?
You should only be healthy.
Should only be healthy. And we look forward to being with you once again very shortly. Thank you so much.